Welcome back, everyone, as we continue our look at Napoleon's first campaign, the one in Italy. If you did not see the first 3 episodes of my reaction to this series, there's a link in the description that'll take you back to the beginning. There's also a link to the original content as well as to a bunch of other videos that I have done concerning Napoleon. There is a part 5 that will be coming about this that we will take a look at down the road. I also have a video coming to you soon from my visit to Napoleon's tomb a few weeks ago. So I hope you'll enjoy that as well. Let's go ahead and dive in.
October 1796. 6 months have passed since General Napoleon Bonaparte took command of the French army of Italy. In that time, he's led a series of brilliant operations against the Austrians and won a string of battles. Now he appears close to final victory. He's driven Austrian field forces off the plains of northern Italy, back towards the Alps. While his troops have the great fortress city of Mantua, the key to Italy, under close siege. Mantua's oversized Austrian garrison is nearing starvation and riddled with disease.
They've held out a long time, considering, but half of them are sick, and they never really intended to have a garrison of that size to begin with. I'm honestly surprised they're holding out as long as they do.
Napoleon appeals to its commander, Field Marshal von Wurmser, to surrender. The brave should be facing danger, not swamp plague, he jibes. But Wurmser is a tough old veteran. He will not yield while any glimmer of hope remains.
So what is the glimmer of hope? You're not obviously hoping that you're going to bust out on your own. You're hoping that another army's coming to your rescue, and you're going to hang on as long as you can. You have no way of knowing if the army's coming. You don't know where they are or if their arrival is imminent. It's just really about hope. It's the hope that'll kill you.
And he knows that to the north, Austria is gathering fresh troops to march to his aid. True, many are Grentz battalions, a type of Habsburg frontier militia, poorly drilled and short of officers. But they help raise the strength of the Austrian field army to 44,000.
But you know what? I'd rather have 41,000 under Napoleon, well led, and at this point pretty experienced, than a untested, poorly led militia force.
And they have a new general to lead them. Feldzeugmeister, or Lieutenant General, Józef Alvinczy.
And here's the thing. One guy is great, but he can't control every little thing on the battlefield. And if you're short on officers and you don't have good command and control at the division, the brigade, the battalion level, it may not matter a whole lot.
The 61-year-old Hungarian was once military tutor to Emperor Francis himself, and is regarded as diligent, sharp and brave. He and his staff draw up plans for a fresh offensive to rescue Wurmser and Mantua. Alvinczy and Kostanovic will lead the main column, 26,000 strong, from Friuli to Bassano, then onwards to Mantua. Davidovic's corps, reinforced to 18,000, will retake Trento and push south through the Adige Valley. The two forces will link up at the earliest opportunity.
It feels like this is all just rinse and repeat, doesn't it? Napoleon lays siege to Mantua. Austrian force comes down from the north toward him. He moves up, defeats him, comes back to Mantua.
Meanwhile, Wurmser, who can muster just 12,000 fit men from the Mantua garrison, will launch powerful sorties to pin down as many French units as possible. Napoleon, by contrast, has received very few reinforcements from France. His weary divisions are suffering from shortages and sickness, and will be outnumbered on every front.
Never stopped him
Alvinczy begins his advance on the 22nd of October. The following day, the heavens open, drenching troops swelling rivers and reducing roads to mud. For the time being, Napoleon is content to observe the enemy struggle forward in such conditions, knowing the effort will exhaust his infantry and disrupt supplies.
So let him come as far as he has to come. Let him get spread out, let him get slowed down, let him get exhausted. You choose the site where you want to fight. Let him come into your killing zone.
On the 2nd of November, fighting breaks out north of Trento, where Napoleon has ordered Vaubois to attack. He wants to keep Davidovich bottled up, but Vaubois is heavily outnumbered, and his attack fails. Vaubois begins pulling back to Caliano, while Massena gives up Bassano and withdraws towards Vicenza. But now Alvinci's advance becomes strung out, slowed by the heavy rain and poor fitness of his recruits.
Perfect for Napoleon.
And it is against Napoleon's nature to remain passive for so long. As the Austrians cross the Brenta, he orders Massena to attack General Liptay's division at Fontaniva, while Augereau attacks Hohenzollern at Bassano. The French launched dozens of separate assaults. But for all their poor march discipline, the Austrian recruits stand their ground and fight hard. With around 3,000 casualties on each side, the Second Battle of Bassano is the bloodiest day's fighting so far in the Italian campaign.
Yeah, it's pretty brutal, 3,000.
And a failure for Napoleon.
Napoleon at this point has been winning battles with, 3-4 to 1 casualties on his favor. This time it's equal. He's been losing 500 men here, 750 there. This time it's 3,000.
Hours later, he receives dire news from Vaubois. During heavy fighting at Caliano, some Croatian troops get behind the French line, triggering panic and a rout. Vaubois loses nearly half his division, killed, wounded, or missing, before he can regroup at Rivoli. The French are falling back on all fronts, and unless Napoleon can conjure something remarkable, he seems destined to suffer a major strategic defeat.
Ouch. Holy cow, he just ripped those guys a new one. Setting an example for the rest of the army, though. They are no longer a part of the Army of Italy.
Napoleon's position is perilous, but his enemy's cautious pursuit affords him some respite. 4 whole days pass while Alvinczy and Davidovich coordinate their next moves. It's not a delay Napoleon would have tolerated if the shoe had been on the other foot. When the Austrians finally advance, it's bungled. Hohenzollern's vanguard approaches Verona to investigate reports of a French retreat.
So I wonder what the connection is here, because the Hohenzollerns are, of course, the family that become the emperor. Okay, so this is the guy we're talking about. He's not in the line that is going to become the emperor of Germany. Kaiser Wilhelm II is a Hohenzollern. So he's from, obviously, a cadet branch, but he's an Austrian general. Joined the Austrian military and fought against Prussia, Ottoman Turkey, and the First French Republic. And he is a general by this point. Looks like a division commander. So not the same branch as the ones who will lead Germany. In fact, he's fighting against Prussia.
This isolated division is too tempting for Napoleon to ignore. He orders Augereau and Massena to attack. They inflict 400 casualties, but Hohenzollern escapes to a ridge near Caldiero. The next day, Napoleon orders renewed attacks. But conditions are atrocious. The French struggle uphill into driving rain and hail.
Weather is a great equalizer. You can have everything else going for you, but you can't account for the weather sometimes.
Their boots slipping in the mud, under fire from Austrians dug in on the ridgetop. Around noon, Colonel Dupuy's 32nd Demi Brigade finally gets onto the ridge. It looks like the French may be able to lever the Austrians out of their position.
Here come reinforcements.
But then, the Austrian army begins to arrive in force to support Hohenzollerns's hard-pressed division. The French are in danger of being outflanked on both wings. They take up new defensive positions and hold the line until darkness, when Napoleon cuts his losses and orders a retreat to Verona.
See, in this case, Napoleon's not fallen into what we talked about yesterday, the sunk cost fallacy, which is, hey, we've already given up men, we've already lost a lot of lives, we can't let it be for nothing, let's keep fighting. That's a mistake that gets a lot of people in deeper trouble. He knows when it's time to cut his losses and back out. At least right now he does.
It has been an unequivocal French defeat. Napoleon's first in battle. The following day, he writes furiously to the Directory in Paris.
Where are my reinforcements?
He has no doubt that they are to blame for his defeat, for repeatedly failing to send reinforcements. We may be on the verge of losing Italy. None of the expected help has arrived. The army of Italy, reduced to a handful of men, is worn out.
Now, it might sound like he's passing the buck and laying blame elsewhere, but think about it. He's basically been doing this with the army that he started with. He's gotten some reinforcements along the way, but not many. Meanwhile, Austria keeps pouring more and more men into this fight, and Napoleon is left fighting with what he's got. So he's got a point.
The heroes of Lodi, Millesimo, Castiglione and Bassano have died for their country or are in the hospitals. The men have nothing left but their reputation and their pride. We are abandoned in the depths of Italy. But despite his apparent despair, Napoleon has already devised a plan to strike back. A breathtakingly bold move that will spawn one of the greatest of Napoleonic legends.
The bridge. So, while he's complaining to them about not getting reinforcements, he's also telling them, but hey, you know what? If everything goes well, we're going to win anyway. Love his confidence.
With the Austrians converging on Verona, Napoleon decides to risk everything on a daring surprise attack. Leaving Macquart to cover Verona, he will circle south with the rest of the army, cross the Adige River, and swing north, threatening to cut Alvinczy's lines of communication and capture his artillery, baggage, and supplies.
It's gutsy.
Such losses will force Alvinczy to abandon his advance. Marching overnight, Augereau and Massena arrive undetected at Ronco. Augereau's men cross the Adige on a pontoon bridge and begin moving north. But with marshland on all sides, they have to stick to the narrow, raised causeway, just 20 yards wide. And when they reach Arcole, where they must cross the bridge to continue north, they find it held by 2 Croatian battalions. Horribly exposed on the causeway, and under heavy fire, the French troops take cover behind its reverse slope. Reinforcements are sent up, but they too are pinned down by the weight of fire from the far bank. Colonel Lannes had discharged himself from hospital that morning in order not to miss the battle. He now attempts to lead a charge, But
you can see why a guy like that is somebody that Napoleon's drawn to, right? He could be comfortable, he could be safe in the hospital recovering from wounds, but he discharges himself, says, I don't want to miss the battle, I want to be there for this, even though they're starting to feel the pressure that the odds are against them.
Hit in the leg. The fiery Augereau refuses to accept defeat and orders another attack. But his men are exhausted and demoralized, with 3 generals wounded. The attack at Arcole has stalled. When Alvinczy hears gunfire from the south, he assumes the French are making a feint to divert him from his own planned attack on Verona. But then comes alarming news that the French have crossed the Adige in force and are behind his left flank. He sends 2 brigades to attack the French bridgehead and diverts Mitrovsky to reinforce Arcole.
So this is a situation where he doesn't fully understand his opponent, right? He thinks that Napoleon's doing one thing, but Napoleon's actually done the opposite. The fake out is where he thinks the main body is, and where he thinks there's a feint happening is where the main body is.
Massena's division, moving northwest to protect the flank of the advance, runs straight into the Austrians at Bionde. At first, the Austrians have the better of it. But a disastrous friendly fire incident triggers panic, and Massena drives the Austrians back up the causeway. Napoleon is increasingly concerned by the hold-up at Arcole. If they cannot break through, Alvinczy will have ample time to redeploy and prevent any advance. He now orders General Gueux to take 2 regiments, cross the Adige at Albaredo, and lead them up the eastern bank of the Alpone River to hit Arcole from the south. He himself rides to the bridge to try to get the attack moving. He finds hundreds of French troops sheltering behind the causeway, unwilling to face the Austrian fire.
Give him a kick in the butt.
General Augereau grabs a standard and begins to advance. This highly romanticized depiction was painted 2 years later. "Grenadiers," he cries, "come and seek your color." In reality, none had the courage to follow him. Then, the commander of the Army of Italy himself draws his saber, picks up a standard, and runs forward. There is withering fire all around. Several men fall wounded. His aide-de-camp, Colonel Muron, is killed. Another aide-de-camp, a Polish officer named Sulkowski, recalls, "The soldiers saw him, and none of them imitated him. I was witness to this extraordinary cowardice, and I cannot conceive it." With the French infantry refusing to follow their officers, the assault on the bridge ends in abject failure.
So this was actually somewhat portrayed like that in the 2002 miniseries about Napoleon. In fact, I'll show you the scene. So the quality's not great. It's kind of a poor resolution, the version that's on YouTube here, but you can at least see how they portray it. And they do show his aide being mortally wounded as well.
How could the Austrians see us?
And here is Miron. We're an entire army on the march, while they're hidden away, silent, and concealed by this filthy mist.
We'll skip ahead to where we see the actual battle happening here.
The charge.
The charge, General?
Go on, boy, and put your heart in it.
And you notice the mud. I like those little details that they get right in this series, right? Showing all the mud, showing that the situation's been pretty terrible in terms of the weather. And they see him get held up on the bridge.
Afraid, Miron? Yes, General! Then you're a brave fellow. John! Onward!
Comes another volley. And down goes his aide. So we can't sit here and watch the whole thing, obviously, but it's definitely worth checking out that miniseries. It's really well done.
A well-timed Austrian counterattack drives them back down the causeway. In the rout, Napoleon's horse loses its footing. He tumbles into the swamp and has to be hauled out by his aides. That evening, General Gieux launches his attack on Arcole from the south. The defences are less formidable on this side, and his men fight their way into the village. Arcole, at last, has fallen. But that night, Gieux's men are ordered to pull back. Napoleon is preparing to retreat. If, as he expects, Davidovich has continued his advance down the Adige Valley, Napoleon must withdraw now or face encirclement. His bold maneuver appears to have failed. Then, at 4 a.m., Napoleon receives a report from Rivoli that changes everything. Not only does Vaubois still hold the town, he hasn't even been attacked yet. Napoleon's line of retreat remains secure.
So here again, the genius of Napoleon, the willingness he has to adapt to the situation, right? He's thinking ahead, okay, we've got to deal with what's going on elsewhere. Even though I'm winning here and the temptation is to pursue this, I've got to think about the big picture. So he's always thinking not only tactically, but also strategically, big scale. But now he gets new information, and that adapts his plans. He doesn't stay stubborn and say, well, no, I'm going to do it anyway.
For at least a few days more. It's all the reassurance he needs. He immediately cancels his retreat and issues orders to attack. Napoleon has lost the element of surprise, and Alvinczy is now planning his own counterattack. Overnight, his troops edge forward. Provera to Belfiore di Porcile, Mitrovsky back into Arcole. Both armies are on the move before dawn. Massena sends skirmishers into the marshland. When the Austrians arrive, bunched up on the causeway, they make easy targets. After a sharp fight in which an Austrian general is killed, Massena's men are driving the enemy before them. Augereau, however, cannot get close to Arcole. The causeway is still swept by Austrian musket fire and canister from across the Alponi.
Right back where they were.
Napoleon orders troops to cross downstream at Albaredo. But the Austrians now have 2 battalions guarding the crossing point. French attempts to float or swim across the river come to naught. Day 2 of the battle ends in stalemate. Many soldiers have to camp amid the marshes and get what food and rest they can. Napoleon will try once more to break through.
Remember, he's on a time...
But he is running out of time.
He's on a time crunch here. He knows he's only got a couple of days to do this before he's got to think about other things, so he's got to win this battle.
Davidovich, who by now has received several urgent requests from Alvinczy to advance, finally attacks on the 17th of November. Vaubois' outgunned division breaks. The Austrians take Rivoli and 1,000 prisoners, and nearly capture Vaubois himself. With Davidovich on the move at last, Napoleon must force a decision at Arcole or retreat. The bridge at Arcole has proved too tough to crack. So Napoleon switches tactics. Augereau's division will cross the Alpone and attack Arcole from the south in force. A column is sent 10 miles south to cross at Legnago and then race back up the eastern bank to support him. Massena will advance up the causeway in support, while also protecting the left flank.
Gutsy.
That night, the French assemble a pontoon bridge over the Alpone. Augereau's division begins crossing before dawn. But at sunrise, Austrian gunners in Albaredo spot the bridge and score a hit, knocking it out of action.
Uh-oh.
Only the 51st Demi Brigade is across, though it gamely begins to advance on Arcole. Massena's advance is also hamstrung by a broken pontoon bridge. To add to the crisis, the Austrians launch an attack on the fragile French bridgehead. Napoleon gathers every available gun to blast the Austrians, who fall back under a withering barrage.
Remember, Napoleon's an artillery guy. If there's one thing he does well in a lot of these battles, it's his effective use of artillery. And there have been several times now during this campaign where things aren't going well on the ground, and a concentration of artillery changes the terms of the engagement.
The bridges are quickly repaired. But as the French advance, they encounter stubborn opposition on both sides of the Alpone. A bloody seesaw battle surges back and forth along the causeways. Neither side can deploy its troops nor gain an advantage. Around 3 p.m, the French column from Legnago arrives, threatening to turn the Austrian flank. Just as Arcole seems about to fall, the Austrians launch a ferocious counterattack across the bridge. Brigadier General Robert is killed. His troops fall back in disarray. The panic is contagious. Augereau's men lose their nerve and fall back to the bridge. The moment of crisis has arrived. But while the enemy has just used his last reserves, Napoleon can call on Massena's unengaged troops, including the elite 32nd Demi Brigade. Their sudden counterattack turns the tide. Massena's men sweep up the causeway, taking scores of prisoners, as Augereau's division resumes its advance.
So you can think about the fact that both sides, their armies have been engaged all throughout the day, actually several days now. They're exhausted, they're probably getting low on supplies and ammunition. You throw fresh troops into that, and there were 3 of the other guy's troops at that point.
As they approach Arcole, Napoleon arranges a small ruse de guerre. 25 of his elite escort sweep in from the east, blowing bugles to feign a mass cavalry charge.
This is a a tactic that actually you'll find in the Bible, right? There's a story of a guy named Gideon leading an attack where they surround a huge force with just a couple hundred guys. They have torches under clay pots, and they have trumpets, and they break the clay pot so that suddenly there are torches all around surrounding the camp, and they blow their horns, and the army that they're surrounding thinks that they're being set upon in the middle of the night by a massive force, and in the confusion they start killing each other. So same kind of idea here.
In the evening light, it's enough to scare the remaining garrison into abandoning the village. As the French continue their advance, Alvinczy orders his exhausted, demoralized army to retreat east to Montebello to protect its lines of communication. The 3-day Battle of Arcole has been a messy, bloody affair with no great tactical flourishes. Napoleon's margin of victory is narrow, and a third of his army are casualties. But he has done enough for now.
Still got to deal with Mantua. At least Napoleon recognizes it. Sometimes it's luck.
Alvinczy may be withdrawing, but Davidovich remains a threat. The next day, Napoleon sets off at his customary pace with Massena's division to reinforce Vaubois. Augereau takes a different route to threaten the Austrians' line of retreat. The confusion that follows between Alvinczy and Davidovich verges on farce. Alvinczy writes to his corps commander, informing him that he will support him by resuming his advance. But Davidovich, having heard of the defeat at Arcole and now directly menaced by Napoleon, is already retreating.
He's like, I'm out.
On receiving Alvinczy's letter, however, he tries to turn his army around, leading to such chaos that he has to immediately countermand that order and resume his retreat.
So why does that matter? Because when you're marching in a particular direction, you tend to have your supplies kind of trailing. Of course, in this case, he knows he's being pursued, so hopefully he's got a rear guard there. But it's not just as simple as turning everybody around and marching in the opposite direction. It's a lot more logistically complex than that. Same kind of thing happens during the Battle of Champion Hill. In the American Civil War in the Vicksburg campaign, where you've got the Confederates in the middle of marching in one direction, and then they very quickly have to turn around and head back the other way, and it's chaos.
The end result is that both Austrian armies are soon withdrawing. And with exquisitely poor timing, gallant old Wurmser chooses this moment to launch his supporting attack from Mantua.
Exquisitely poor timing. I love that.
At least secure some much-needed supplies, at a cost of 800 casualties.
Bought himself more time.
It has been a bruising campaign for Napoleon. By some estimates, he has lost more men than the Austrians. He has suffered his first defeat in battle, and won a costly, messy victory at Arcole.
The problem is the Austrians keep pouring more men into the situation, and the French aren't.
But he has beaten the odds and thrown back the enemy. What's more, his heroic conduct at the bridge at Arcole will soon take on a life of its own.
And here's the thing about that attack on the bridge. The attack failed. But what it did was it sent a message to the men. I'm right here with you. I'm one of you. I'm willing to take the same risks that you are. I won't ask you to do anything I'm not willing to do myself. And then he does follow it up by eventually getting a victory. And those kinds of stories go a long way.
Artists and pamphleteers turn a slightly embellished version of events into a sensational piece of personal PR that captivates France.
It's interesting. I don't know a lot of French, but I know that this says he was born in Corsica on the 15th of August, 1769. So it's interesting that right on and it says Buonaparte, right? That's the Italian spelling of his name. Because remember, at this point during the Italy campaign, that's how he's still known. He hasn't started signing his name as Bonaparte yet.
PR that captivates France. With Napoleon's active encouragement, the world is witnessing the birth of the Napoleonic legend.
Yep.
A powerful force that will inspire loyalty and devotion for many years to come.
The artwork's fantastic. So good.
For now, both armies settle into winter quarters as December brings bitter cold and heavy snow to northern Italy. In Mantua, the Austrian garrison is near its limit. Starvation beckons, though Wurmser is determined to hold out to the last. The Austrians will have one last chance to save the city. A final offensive to decide the outcome of the war in Italy.
And that'll be in episode 5, which will be down the road a little bit. We will come back to it when the time comes. Let me know your thoughts. Use the comment section below, and we'll see you again soon. Thanks for watching.